bum 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 bum.
You're listening to Tov, a podcast about the good place in Jewish ideas. Hey, this is John Spirasavet and Rebecca Rosenthal. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, John. So good to be back. We were just talking about how this might be my last episode-specific episode.
Episode-specific episode, yeah. Yeah, we're getting toward this end, and I'm not sure whether the right thing to do is just to, get to the end and stop, or whether to throw in some more of these sort of special theme episodes or special person episodes. We'll see what falls into our lap.
All right. You dreamed up this amazing idea, and then you made us do it, and here we are at this point.
It was such a different world when we started too, I think. Yeah, that'll be interesting to track also. Wow. So I was going to ask you, are you much of a Facebook user in terms of like groups and not just your personal communicating?
A little bit groups, definitely. I'm in some groups that are much more active than others. There's a lot of Jewish educator groups that I use. I do lurk in some groups just for the drama, which I enjoy. And so that's fun too.
Well, I think in Good Place Universe, that definitely is like one of the things that loses us points.
Lurking in a Facebook group for the drama, yeah.
For the drama, yeah.
And I know exactly what post to click on that will like definitely have generated a lot of completely off the wall comments.
I actually joined Facebook because of actually Jewish educators. There was some group I was a part of 15 plus years ago, and like that was where it was happening. So I was like, well, I didn't intend to. And as a point of pride, I actually have not changed my profile photo for all those years, which I think is 14 or 15. But that's not why I asked you. There are lots of Good Place fan groups, and I don't know if you're in any of them, but as we're recording this on May 1st of 2020, sorry, it's only 120. It's 2023. One of the groups, Good Place Shirt Posting, has been sort of lit up the last week with a bunch of Jewish-related stuff. There's a hashtag the Tov place. Tov, of course, being Hebrew for good. And so it's kind of a meme group, loosely, people will express themselves with Good Place memes, photos that they type, whatever they type on. And Jewish people and not Jewish people have been sort of chiming in. So since it is a private group, I'm not going to like call out people by name, but there have been some interesting posts and comments, especially by, and you'll know who you are if you happen to be listening, JKEBMTYRNS. I might be missing someone else, so there might be multiple R's and S's, with your letter of the alphabet. But it's been cool to see how from the ground up the Jewish discussion about the Good Place has been bubbling up. So definitely you should check it out, and all our listeners should do that too if that's what you're using social media for. So do you want to get us into the episode, Rebecca? Give us some summary and let's go.
Sure. So today's episode is You've Changed, Man, written by Matt Murray, directed by Rebecca Asher, my co-Rebecca. While the judge searches inside all the Janets for the Earth reset button, a newly confident Chidi tries to work out an alternative proposal for the afterlife. They bring to the Good Place Committee and Sean their first idea for a larger medium place, where most people would go. Sean refuses, and the Good Place Committee suggests giving in more and more to his demands. With only 10 minutes left, Janet brings everyone into her void, including the judge and Timothy Olyphant. Chidi sketches out a new plan based on the group's own experiences. Each human will be subjected to an individualized test and rebooted as many times as they need in order to pass. In each successive reboot, they will retain not their actual memories, but a trace of what they have learned in the form of a little voice in their head. Sean refuses but relents when he realizes that even torture had become mundane, and fighting with Michael was the only thing that made his existence interesting.
Any good laughs for you in this episode?
So, I mean, it just opened up with like such a good moment when they're in neutral Janet's void, and the judge says, all Janet voids are nothing, but this is the most nothing. And then when they're talking about how they can convince the judge, right? They say to, I guess, regular original Janet, she says, I already showed her the light and it wasn't impressed. It's probably because she was there when it was in bed. So I thought that was like really, really funny. There were some great great Jason moments in this where he's talking about a Jacksonville plea bargain, which correctly involves bribing people.
I thought it was not sleeping with the judge. Was that?
I can't remember. And the classic trolley problem, and then he does this whole thing, and Chidi's like, well, that's very wrong, but in a roundabout way, kind of right. That was really funny, talking about this is messed up even for Florida, which in the time of this episode, they didn't even know how messed up Florida could get. So
yes.
And I don't know if you caught this when Sean is smashing the stuff. The little stand is called Joni Loves Tchotchkes.
Yes, I did.
Which I thought was so funny. And then I realized I didn't know how to spell tchotchkes, and I didn't want to go back and figure that out, but I'm the only one who's going to see that. So yeah. And then referring to the bigger medium place as your own personal Cincinnati. I'm sorry, Cincinnati people. I know how you love Cincinnati, but that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was, and I have family in Cincinnati, so I felt bad for that. I don't know if that was a Cincinnati-specific dig or Ohio, which has sometimes been described as the essence focal point of America, because it's sort of in the middle of everything, but I don't know, Cincinnati.
Well, I think people from Cincinnati they do love Cincinnati, and a number of my friends who live there really, really do love it.
It does seem like a great place. This whole disco, ish theme, I thought was also interesting too, given who I imagine the Good Place audience is. I have to say, my kids have no idea what disco is. And I think they think Disco Janet is funny, but they have no idea why. They recognize the song Funky Town, which I don't know if that's technically disco, but maybe just from the right era.
That's funny. I don't know. Disco Janet's funny anyway, but especially when the judge is in there. I mean, Raya Rudolph is just incredibly funny and talented, and she's great as the judge, and her love of Justified and Timothy Olyphant. I had forgotten about that. That was pretty good.
That was quite a thing. I'm not really that up on them and Timothy Olyphant, who I recognize, but I don't think I could do you have a connection to him?
I've never seen the show, but I know about it. And so it's just kind of random, right? She's the judge of all the universe, and she's about to wipe out humanity, and she's really into this one show that she's been watching. It's like when you find out really serious people also love Real Housewives or something, yeah. Right? It's like that. And it seems sort of out of character. And so it's just funny.
Yes, it is. Now, there was a little thing in there about Dr. Ruth, that being Dr. Ruth Westheimer. When you were at JTS at the seminary, did you get to meet her?
I have actually met her at Central because she comes around here every once in a while. I think I probably also met her at JTS. But just the image of Dr. Ruth, LeBron James, and Bruno Mars together and performing a tracheotomy and winning multiple Grammys. I love that. And then Eleanor's like, actually, I would like to hear that story.
Yeah.
As would I. We'd all like to hear that story. But it's just like they had some kind of dartboard and they were like, what would be extra funny? And they came up with 3 random things, 3 random celebrities and 3 random things.
I think that 3 random people thing, it's like a setup for a joke that almost never loses. You got your priest, your minister, and a rabbi or whatever, but this is even better. I would definitely swap my place out for LeBron James anytime. I mentioned Dr. Ruth because at the seminary in our senior seminar, when they were talking, I think they were afraid we would go out into the real world and not know about real people exactly. And so they actually brought her in to talk about the rabbi's role in counseling people about sex. And she quoted a lovely Hasidic teaching about it, or Hasidic and Talmudic stuff. And it was a delightful hour that we got to spend with her. Completely appropriate, I think, in every way.
Maybe that's what she was talking to LeBron and Bruno Mars about.
He wasn't there, but they weren't there. I'm not sure Bruno Mars was born when I was in rabbinical school.
We can suggest to the deans of JTS that if they bring in Dr. Ruth, that they also bring in LeBron James and Bruno Mars and just, see what happens.
Yeah. I thought it was a great Sean episode, in addition to being, as you say, a great Jason episode. And even the way he says, new ideas are gross. They sicken me. There's something about his radio voice that really got me. And then his sort of cogitations about how life will be different if he's not torturing as many people when they offer to give themselves up as the price of his accepting their initial plan. On the one hand, I would love to get some spiders in those buttholes. On the other hand, there would be billions of buttholes going completely unspidered. And I have millions of lava monsters down there who will be out of a job. I ask you, into whose throats are they supposed to pour lava? I just love that into whose, that, proper grammatical. And you must have, did you catch his other line, you education director? You corkscrew your first eyeball, you're like, man, I can't believe they're paying me to do this. By the trillionth, it's like, I should have just been a teacher.
Yes, I did. I caught that. I did not write that down. But, I was thinking about the piece about how he says, like, well, I could take the four of you, but then there'd be so many people left. And you know the story about the starfish?
Yes.
Somebody's walking on the beach and there's all these starfish that wash up on the beach, and this is the opposite moral, but it's moral, but it's the opposite way of looking at it. And the kid starts throwing back the starfish, and the parent says, what are you doing? You couldn't possibly save all those starfish. And the kid says, well, but I'm going to make a difference to that one starfish. And so it's a little bit the same, where he's like, should I trade the many for the few? If the few will, get more, I'll get more out of it with the few.
Although, I don't know, I think on Sean's philosophy, after you put a few spiders in their buttholes, it probably is not as exciting. There's a diminishing return of truly. That's the opposite of the LeBron Dr. Ruth thing too, is that's a joke. That's a line they've worked in like almost every season. The scribble scrabble thing back, and did you really write my idea down, which I certainly have done in different settings and sometimes with kids where like it's not a serious thing and you want to give the impression that you wrote down what someone said, even though you have no intention of actually considering it. And I love how Jason calls that out. I'm sure that's happened to him before. You didn't really write down. And then that particular thing, did you actually write it down, or did you just do a scribble scrabble? Kind of caught me. And on the official podcast, the writer here, Matt Murray, said that he got that scribble scrabble locution from his, I think he said maybe 7-year-old son, who I'm sure doesn't say locution. And I just remember having a friend of ours, their daughter, when our kids were little, like in 3 or 4, talk about some drawing as just a scribble scrabble. So I just love that very specific little preschool.
But also that's like such a parenting trick where you're like, yeah, I'm listening. I'm totally absorbed in your story about Lego, Minecraft, Star Wars that you've been playing for the last 4 hours. I have absorbed every detail. Right. But then they test you and they're like, what was the name of that guy on that planet that I told you about 4 months ago? And you're like, trouble.
Wow, my kids aren't nearly that gotcha. I want to meet your kids. They're going to be excellent lawyers, it sounds like.
Yeah, they would like you to absorb every word that they have ever said.
So I think that you and I attacked this episode from a couple of different directions. So why don't you lead us in?
Yeah, so there were 2 moments that I think anyone who watches this episode it'll be clear what the main philosophical moments of the episode are. The first was this discussion that Chidi has about the cruelty of the punishment doesn't match the cruelty of the life lived. And that whether you were a little bit bad or a lot bad, you kind of get tortured for eternity. So that's one piece. And then Eleanor says, like, yes, this is about justice. And he's like, oh, that's so sexy. But then the second piece was that Chidi talks about the fact that it's final, that there's no chance for redemption, and there's no way to give humans a fighting chance within the system. So look, both of these things are true about our criminal justice system too. And you could have someone who's more expert in criminal justice here to talk about it. But you hear all the time of stories. There's a very famous one about a child, 17-year-old child who died in Rikers for stealing a backpack because he couldn't afford bail, right? And just how incredibly cruel that is. And the ways in which we don't in any way set up our justice system so that people can be redeemed. We punish them, and then when they get out, they have fines and parole and all kinds of other things that they have to work on. People can't vote in a number of states, and it's hard for people to get jobs. We do not seem to, in the American criminal justice system, believe in either redemption or balancing the cruelty of the punishment to the crime. And you see that so much in the war on drugs, in particular with mandatory minimums and other things. Like it's just we throw people away for life. And even if they get out of prison, like we've thrown away most of their lives because of the way our justice system is set up. So the justice system is broken. soapbox, and I think there's plenty of good Jewish reasons to get involved in criminal justice reform. And actually, Central Synagogue, where I work, is very involved in different aspects of criminal justice reform. But
and we should throw those into the show notes. So
throw them into the show notes.
Yeah.
And if you know Rabbi Hilly Haber, she's the person who leads our criminal justice work with really such like moral clarity and beautiful Torah. And she, I'm sure, would have a lot to say about this episode. I don't know if she's a fan of The Good Place or not. But I think the other piece is that if you look in our Jewish sacred texts, there is so much in the Talmud in particular about how to be sure that the punishment fits the crime. And they spend pages and pages and pages. I couldn't even bring you one text because there's so many out there where they're like, okay, your hand got hurt. What is your job? Does your job involve doing things with your hand? Well, then you should get paid more money in damages because you also can't do your job. But if it doesn't involve that, then you get paid less money. And they even ask questions like, are you a very sensitive person? And are you very sensitive to pain? And maybe it hurt you more than it hurt me to have your hand or your arm or whatever be injured. And the rabbis try really, really hard to understand the value of your pain so they can enact an appropriate punishment. They seem to care a lot, actually, about not making the punishment more cruel than the crime. And even, I think this has been discussed on this podcast before, even in cases of death penalty, the rabbis basically talk it out of existence because they see the death penalty as being sort of the ultimate cruelty, the ultimate thing you can't get back. And they even say, like, better 1,000 guilty people go free than you execute one innocent person. And so I think the Talmud is really the opposite of the system that Chidi's describing. This sort of like, we really, really try hard to make the punishment fit the crime.
So you're saying the Talmud is the opposite of Chidi's critique of the bad place, of the current bad place.
Yes.
That is so interesting. I'm going to have something in a few minutes to say about your construal of the Talmud, which I totally hadn't thought about. But what also you're making me think about how much the Talmudic calibration does have to do with also the victim, it sounds like. And that's one of the things that I've sort of lost track of, I think, in the descriptions of how bad people are. I guess we've had Brent. It seems like we haven't dealt with Brent in like a million years, who obviously his victims were probably all his coworkers, and particularly women and people of color. And so I think we've sort of established that. But in terms of like our core cast, Jason's thing here, you know, what's messed up even for Florida is trying to paint a Taco Bell logo on a snapping turtle. I'm not sure how the Talmud would sort of account for the snapping turtles thing. And I guess, you know, and even Chidi's like, I drank almond milk thing is sort of, it's not that it's at all, he doesn't think it's a victimless crime. He just doesn't know who the victims are, I guess. Some of their flaws are not actually because of specific like wrongs that they did. And that's interesting because we don't even hear about points always described in terms of a bad thing you did to other people, but just how odious you were as a person to be around. Although Eleanor, I guess, you know, was the one who definitely defrauded old people and the whole T-shirt thing.
Yeah, I also wonder, you know, thinking about the almond milk thing, right? Almonds take a lot of resources from the planet, obviously, and like that's bad in sort of large abstract way, but like punching someone in the face is bad in a very concrete, you can understand who the victim is and what their pain is, and you can talk to them, right? You can't exactly figure out what is the monetary value of drinking almond milk.
Yeah, and who are you going to pay it back to, even if you could do it? Although we have the wonderful model, in again to call out some other of our rabbinic colleagues of the tomato rabbis in Torah, who haven't exactly figured out a way to directly compensate the victims of some of the horrible human trafficking and slave conditions that have been in the tomato picking industry, but who at least lobbied that we should then pay it forward and that we should be willing to pay more for tomatoes in order to help the next group of people who are pickers. So I guess that's one way it could work. But it's interesting, Chidi's system that he comes up with does not talk about making restitution at all. It talks about improving yourself. And I'm just chewing on that that's not something you get a chance necessarily go back to, although it sounds like, and we'll see this later on in the next episode, that the test that you take in this new system will probably put you in a situation where you have the chance in sort of a simulation maybe to act differently towards someone who you knew on Earth.
It's interesting as you're saying that to think about like Earth being now the first draft. There's actually nothing you can do about your time on Earth in the new system. You actually can't go back and right your wrongs or pay restitution or just like, I mean, I guess it depends what the tests are like, but it would be very confusing Earth if like people kept coming back and trying again.
Yes.
I mean, look, Jeremy, Bearimy, and everything else, but like everyone would have to live in their own reality. It would be very complicated.
Yeah.
But I guess that's one flaw potentially in Chidi's plan, is that it's so individual to you and your experience, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to repair whatever damage you did on Earth. Even if Chidi in the afterlife only drinks oat milk or whatever kind of milk is best for the Earth, he still will have done damage in some way to Earth. But maybe like that's the Jeremy Bearimy of it, and like we're just not meant to understand. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how in this system there's suffering that's punishment, and that's this thing about the Judas Schlar essay, that it's cruel to be punished and it's cruel to suffer beyond what you should. And we can sort of take on ourselves the thought that, okay, I should suffer as a consequence, or I should somehow suffer as a way of paying back or feeling what it is that I did. But often the suffering that's what greater is the suffering that we cause to other people. And my process of learning, however long my process of learning takes, means that you have to suffer longer while I learn. And yeah, that's rough.
So can I move on to the other piece?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right, which is the solution that they propose to the problem of the ultimate cruelty of the current system, which is a chance for humans to be redeemed and give them a fighting chance and let them live their lives over and over again. And as we were preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about Yom Kippur as the Jewish version of this. And you know how I feel about Yom Kippur, that it's like this great happy dance party day, right? Yeah, because it's actually our chance to do it again. And we get to do it again with all the memories that we have had up until now, right? We don't even get our memory erased. We actually get to start again in some way with all the memories that we have. And it's very hard because like you're not getting help from demons and Michael and the judge and anyone else to sort of give you a clean slate. You have to get yourself to the clean slate place. But that's what Yom Kippur is supposed to be. Yom Kippur is supposed to be like, let's do it again, and we're going to do it better this time. I think that's a lot of why Judaism is so interested in cycles, because there's nowhere to get off the train, essentially, right? You just keep going until you figure out how to do it better. And some of us, live long lives and change and grow and improve and get to be better people by the end. And some of us either don't take that opportunity and still live long lives, or don't get that opportunity. But Yom Kippur really, I think, serves as a version of what Chidi is proposing.
That's so interesting, because so what you're saying is that we on Yom Kippur ideally kind of design our own simulation, or design our own personalized reality, and we project it on I want to say a green screen. We're supposed to dress in white, so I guess we project it on a white screen of ourselves and the people around us. And that's cool. I think the one way in which maybe it does track is that, in a way, what Chidi is saying is like, there are people on Earth who are good, like they did good enough, and they're going to pass the first time. And they probably did this kind of recollecting and reflecting and working on themselves. But then everybody else has this other option, which is to go back and do it again. But you're saying there is sort of a third option, which is that people who might not naturally be, people who are also, I think people who are introspective and reflective do use Yom Kippur that way, but that if you're sort of moderately so, or maybe not, if you do bump into Yom Kippur, it might help you do that while you're on Earth still, and might over time, especially if you get lucky enough to live long enough through a number of iterations of that, then you get to do that on Earth.
Yeah, and I think, this is Rebecca's soapbox episode, but this idea that Yom Kippur only works if you do all the prep and everything leading up to it, right? You're supposed to go ask forgiveness from people beforehand, and you're supposed to sort of like figure out your deal beforehand, because Yom Kippur actually that's the studying and this is the test, right? Yom Kippur is like can you do it better? okay, now prove it. Let's see what's going to happen. And, there's all of this beautiful rabbinic literature about the idea that, and Rabbi Sharon Brous teaches about this very beautifully. And also Rabbi Alan Liu in the best High Holiday book, This is Real, and You Are Completely Unprepared, which is also the title of Life. They, teach about this idea that on Yom Kippur is when you make all of the promises and you say you're going to be better and you think about all the things you could do better. And then what you're supposed to do immediately after eating your bagel, after the fast of Yom Kippur, is to start building the sukkah, the hut for the holiday of Sukkot, right? And that is a symbol of the movement from saying what you're going to do better to doing what you're going to do better, right? That when you literally take I live in New York City. I don't have a backyard. I've never built a sukkah, but presumably you stick something in the ground, right? Like, and the only sukkah I ever had was one of those pop-up things, and it was in our trash can area in our apartment in LA. There was no ground; it was just cement. But it was a great sukkah. But you put something in the ground and you say, like, not only did I think about doing better, I'm actually going to do better now, right? I'm going to hold both of those pieces of the discussion.
So now I'm at a place where I need like a blackboard in back of me in order to like keep track of like the three thoughts I'm having, which are like pieces of a puzzle. Yes, definitely. So on the one hand,
Janet, one or the other.
Yes. I got all my Janet. Whoop, I need a blackboard. So on the one hand, it's all back to our original Maimonides thing, that teshuvah is when you go back to that situation and you get to do it again. It really is like if you could conjure. And I think the way Maimonides says this is it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It's a personalized test based on things you've actually done before. You don't actually go back to the same situation, and that is the test. Did you do something different? And I've been sort of loving that idea, as it is really the ultimate test. But then through actually really since we got to like Jeremy Bearimy, I've been thinking about this issue of memory, which is that our memories just aren't that good. Like even if I really want to on Yom Kippur try to reconstruct all the things I wish I could go clean up or return to, like I don't remember them all. And the nice thing about this acknowledgement in Chidi's system is the assumption is that you're not going to remember in detail. You're going to remember just enough for some kind of trace. You won't even remember why you have this voice in your head, but you'll just remember the sense of what doing better in that kind of situation is, which I feel like is a very compassionate way to think about memory. There's some amazing stuff in the work of Daniel Kahneman, who I think we talk about a lot, the Israeli Nobel Prize winning psychologist who tells us how a lot of the things we think about our intentional minds are just bullshit. And he talks about, I think he has this statistic, like if you take a week-long vacation somewhere and it's like amazing, that in the whole rest of your life, if you aggregate the amount of time you spend like remembering it, it'll be like 7 minutes or something like that. We have a poor sense of our own ability to remember things. But then,
I mean, that's part of why there's a whole discussion of eyewitness testimony in both the Talmud and in our modern criminal justice system, and sort of the unreliability of eyewitness testimony and the way in which we see things, especially in a traumatic moment, if you're witnessing like a crime or something really bad, that actually we're terrible at remembering things. Like we remember the senses and we remember a little bit about like what we saw, but we do not in any way hold on to the details.
Yeah. And so what I was going to say is like the third piece on my blackboard is that one thing that Yom Kippur and also Rosh Hashanah does is it talks to us about that our memories are worth remembering even when we don't remember them. And we have this prayer which talks about the divine looking at all our memories. And it's kind of like the book in the accounting department, I guess, in Neutral Janet's and Matt the accountant's place where they've got everything. But instead of it being coded with a numerical value and every new thing we did that no one ever else did before, it gets its own point value assigned to it. It's actually basically in our handwriting. And I often think about that as well. First choice is maybe that concentration on that prayer moment will help me remember things that I forgot during the year that are actually worth remembering, either because they were good and I forgot how good I was, or they were bad and I need to go back, or it's sort of at least an encouragement that that's like deposited somewhere. And that maybe that reminds me of Chidi, sort of like the memory is worth having been recorded even if we can't access it in its original data set. And so I kind of like how
isn't that the whole purpose of almost everything we do in Jewish life. We read the story from the Torah every single year because like we're concerned we might forget about it, right? We have the Passover Seder and we're supposed to pretend like we were there in Egypt, like we remember it, right? We're counting now towards Shavuot, which is the holiday about the giving of the Torah. And the rabbis teach that we're all there, every Jew across time, we're there. But, you know, do you remember it? And the whole holiday, all the holidays and the cycles, I think, are designed to sort of remind us that these are our memories too, even when we forgot.
Yeah, so I think that balance between like constantly being reminded to remember and being unable to is a theme that I have actually been thinking about because of this show, especially as we go through these days in the Jewish year, in addition to the ones you mentioned, Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day for Israel, and just what are we remembering, even good things, independence in Israel, and that we don't have all the details. And in that sense, I really like Chidi's way out. And it also made me think about how, you know, so Chidi recently got all his memories back, and it gave him this sense of clarity and confidence. And he had to have all the memories of his life and all of his Baramis and stuff and his reboots, you know, put in. So he's got that. As opposed to Jason, a number of episodes ago, I guess in the prior season, who he got all his memories back and he like forgot them all immediately when they were on that little train thingy going to rescue Janet. He's like, wait, can you do that again? And then we see that like he in this process enough gets through to him that he is actually able to learn even without really remembering.
The funny thing about Jason is he has actually a lot of very detailed intact memories that he seems to learn nothing from at any time.
Yeah.
Nothing. I mean, one of the other, we haven't talked about this, but one of the other favorite things is he was like, was once in jail for stealing a hot dog. Okay, it was a hot dog shaped car. I stole a Wienermobile. First of all, he's hilarious. And second of all, like he has all of these memories. He knows all the things that he did in life, and he knows most of them weren't awesome, but yet he doesn't seem to use his memories in the way that Chidi is imagining, right? He more absorbs the lessons from Chidi or from the sort of being part of the collective group than he does from getting any chance to relive or rethink his memories.
Yeah, you know, I've been a lot lately down this rabbit hole. I don't think it's actually a rabbit hole, kind of about who we are and are we constituted by all our memories, or do we have to be the person who has that train of awarenesses of everything from the first thing we could remember till now, you know, or not, you know, both because there might be either, again, normal garden variety things we just don't remember, or this variation between, as exactly how you're pointing out, Jason, or for that matter, you know, traumatic memories, God forbid, which probably it's better not to have to constantly have access to them and or at least to relive them in quite that same way. Our relationship to our memories to each of our memories or types of memories is going to be different, and how that plays in. And I think what Chidi has done is say, like, it's not a failure actually to not be able to account for every moment in your life. It would be a failure if you didn't learn from them, you know, sufficiently. And maybe there are different patterns of connecting to your memories. I mean, there's no way that Jason, even thousands of Baramis from now, can really be Jason without having been Jacksonville Jason. But even at the end, like in the finale, when he has that long time of peaceful moments and Janet says to him, something like, you know, you sound like a monk, and he's like, what are you talking about? He didn't remember that he was once play acting as a Buddhist monk, and that would have been a good thing. Sorry, I was meandering around there. I love this idea of trying to figure out what the relationship of us and our memories, and how having that relation to that both, you know, constitutes us, but also helps us be accountable. I didn't say that quite perfectly. Because the other thing I think that Chidi is doing is saying that ultimately you're not being measured up against, I guess your memories are serving your ethical development, right? It's not important that Tahani, exactly as she will in the next episode, you know, deals with her sister and her parents. Like that's not the only test, but that just might be an emblematic test because it's present for her. But if she's a good person, maybe just being able to pull off the mod look, would be good enough.
Yeah, that was great. Also, I'm sure Tahani can pull off a mod look. She actually has a pretty good look for it.
What you said about the Talmud kind of caught me in an interesting way, because I was trying to think about, like, when it comes to the big picture of judgment versus learning, is existence a lifelong learning and growing process, or is it a process fundamentally about judgment and where there's kind of an endpoint and you're sent to whichever of the places? And, well, on the one hand, thinking that Judaism is not a big heaven and hell religion, it still seems to me the case that, both of these things are very much part of, if we zoom like way out, feel like, I think a lot of people would say, are part of the ethos of Judaism and Jewish communities. No question that learning is a very core value and core practice and everything in terms of just, how we put the Torah and its study in the middle of everything. But also people talk about Jews as being very judgy and Jewish communities as being very judgy kinds of places at their worst, certainly, but sometimes at their normal. But the other thing that I thought about is that much as we might want to push that sort of heaven hell thing off to the Christians and say, well, they did that to biblical religion, the Torah has a lot of this world judgment in it. The Torah and the Hebrew Bible, they've got a lot to say, because they're sort of organized. A lot of the Bible is around this story of not individual punishment, but the collective destiny and punishments of the Jewish people. And so, in the Torah, Moses teaches a lot of teachings and also says, let me tell you what's going to happen if/when you guys as a group get it wrong. And it's grisly. I think Sean would love the later chapters of Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
What I was saying really was about a formal justice system. Yeah. More like it was maybe a little bit too general. But
no, you're right. I was going to.
In a formal justice system, they're very concerned about that. But you're right. Like there's a lot of punishments and grisly, disgusting curses. We're coming up on that Torah portion very soon in the next few weeks, and all kinds of Sean things that are going to happen to us. And if we disobey God, right? And in one sense, it's very black and white, where you have like, if you do this bad thing will happen to you. If you do this other bad thing, another bad thing will happen to you. But as I always discuss with my students when we come around to this parsha, right? We know that that's not exactly how the world works, right? Our world is not set up for systems of, if you do this bad thing will happen to you immediately. And if you do this good thing will happen to you immediately.
Yeah. It's at the same time, I think what happens is that stuff is real. And, it played out in the early history. So the prophets do basically say, hey, we can point to that stuff in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all those curses. And like, it's true, you guys as a people went off the rails and this would happen to you. You suffered, grisly wars and you were exiled. But then at the same time, I think about two things. One is, so my teacher, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, said that the book of Deuteronomy is so interesting because it has these two things. On the one hand, it's got some of those statements with some of the grisly Sean-like punishments in it, but also right after that is where it introduces the idea of teshuvah. Even after all that, it says there's no amount of curse and suffering that could happen to you collectively and even individually that you somehow can't come back, or that the divine doesn't want to bring you back from. And that same, Deuteronomy in particular, if anybody reads it from cover to cover, is also kind of the Torah's big statement about learning and about dedicating yourself to that. And I think about a bat mitzvah in our synagogue. I can call her out not by initial but by name. Her name was Sarah Kolopsky, and at the age of 13, she took this paragraph in our prayers, what we call the second paragraph of the Shema. The Shema being one of our central prayers, and it's made up of a few passages in the Bible. And it's, some people, and I go through times where I don't want to read it either because it sort of encapsulates this reward punishment thing. If you do this, you'll get the rains, and if you don't do that, I'm going to dry up the sky, and you guys will definitely perish. And then it concludes with, it moves into this statement about, therefore you should talk about these words of Torah all the time, and you should wear them on your arms and on your head, and you should write them on your doorposts and all that. And Sarah said, well, this is the deal, that a God who is going to threaten you with all those punishments has an obligation to make sure that you actually learn such that you'll never have to suffer those things, and that you can't possibly. I know. I was like, whoa, and with her permission, I'll post her bat mitzvah devar Torah in her own words. I just thought that was a great connection between two things that didn't seem to go together. And what I was tying back was you were talking about the Talmud is I thought, well, the Talmud seems like the opposite of the Bible in that way because it is so much. It is the book of learning. Talmud, means learning. And then I loved how you brought it back the other way and said, well, even in that book, they talk about the careful calibration of punishments and consequences. And I'm thinking to something where the Talmud even looks at things that aren't like court punishments, but looks at what some people take to be divine punishments and say, which things seem like they really are and which seems like, no, that can't possibly be. That's a suffering, but it's not a punishment. And at the same time, then I went down, I very quickly and badly, bad intellectual modeling. I gave a quick read to this essay of Judith Shklar's that is referenced in the episode. It's very short, 14 pages or so, about the cruelty. But it talked really about how cruelty is a lot of times the product of power. People have said that a lot of what has enabled the Jewish tradition to develop these compassionate tendencies is that for a couple thousand years we didn't have any power, which is not entirely true because I think we had power to govern our own local communities, but we didn't have the kind of political power that could really inflict some of the punishment harms that you were talking about earlier. And it has made me wonder, Jews participate in power systems today, including the justice system that you're talking about here, and of course in Israel too. And what's neat, I think, in The Good Place is that Chidi talks about, Chidi's an intellectual, and he says, I'm just the ideas guy. I love, that's a great last line. But Michael and Sean, who are going to have the power, it's cool, the idea that they would buy into it and say that, like, the cruelty, Michael, who's been converted long ago, the cruelty, it seemed like exciting early in my career to be able to pull that off, but he got there earlier, and Sean is now at this, it's just not whatever. And in that essay by Professor Shklar, she really talks about how initially political leaders or even religious leaders would use that, and they would, it would somehow make them think like they were God's messengers, but it was so detached, obviously, from all reality. And these people who are godlike now are going to buy into this calibration that you were talking about, which I really like.
Well, the thing about Chidi being an ideas man, I don't know. I just came up with the idea. Now you, Mark and Sean, you have to execute it. And Mark and Sean's relationship is so interesting because, they were colleagues and then they were kind of at each other's throats. And now they have to go back to being colleagues again, and colleagues in a completely different context. I mean, you could probably do a whole thing about The Good Place as a workplace drama, but that's for somebody else's podcast. But to bring it back to Judaism a little bit, right? We have this like study and action thing, right? You can't just come up with the ideas. You actually also have to figure out how to make them happen. And you can't just go around studying everything all the time. You have to be the person who puts your studies into action. Otherwise, like, what's the point? You can't just be the Chidi who's going to like read all day, right? You have to also be the new Chidi who's going to help execute.
The other thing that you said before in pointing out a bit of a kind of duality in this whole scheme was about the point in time judgment versus the learning process, which I really liked, and was thinking about that as sort of potentially a contrast between the Torah with all its, scary punishments, is said as a journey of a group of people moving forward from slavery to freedom and settling in their land and all of that. And the Talmud isn't like that. The Talmud is kind of a Mobius strip that just kind of bends back on itself, and where it's really all about the moment. And I think Chidi is trying to, in some ways, square that circle and say that it's wrong to sort of pin all of a human's travel and journey in their life on a moment, even if that moment is kind of the last moment or the sum of all their moments. And
one of the things I don't think The Good Place really ever deals with, right, is that all four of our main characters have met a sort of untimely death. None of them are 95-year-olds who die in their sleep. They all have died in some kind of dramatic fashion, and they're all relatively young. Probably, you and I know this from our work, they have left behind some kind of like trauma for the people that loved them, right? All of them dying in like a young and unexpected kind of way. And I guess the idea that they may feel like they have more unfinished business than people who either were prepared in some way for their death, they were sick, they knew that they were going to die in some fashion, or people who were older, those kinds of things. They may feel more urgency around the question of like, how do we solve this problem? Because they feel like they have more unfinished business on earth. I don't know if they feel that way or not, but it was something that struck me, which is like that we never actually really spend a lot of time reckoning with that piece of how they died.
That's interesting. And if I were to propose one revision to Chidi's proposal now, based like literally, I'm thinking of it the second, it's to do like the season 3 thing where they actually get to go back on Earth and save somebody else's life or eternal soul as kind of a part of their thing. That would be a neat thing to have incorporated in. So that would sort of address also what we were talking about earlier in terms of this being all very individualized and all that. You know, Donna Shellstrop and Camilla and everything. That would be a cool thing. You have to go back and repair the one unrepaired relationship in your life before you can come back for the next test. I'm going to recommend that to Chidi. What'd you say?
It's The Good Place, the sequel. You know, they're like rebooting all these television shows. In 10 years, when they decide to reboot The Good Place, that's where it can be.
That sounds good. It can be there should be a few of them. There should be one where they're all, yes, in their 90s, and there should be a Good Place Babies where they're all babies. Because that seems to be what they do with a lot of those, at least in animated. Isn't there like Star Wars babies? I don't know, Baby Yoda.
Everybody has babies now. Babies for everyone. Can I just add one more thing, which is where Janet refers to herself, early versions of Janet as a Palm Pilot in a cool vest. I forgot to put that in at the beginning when we were talking about it. But first of all, I had a Palm Pilot and I loved it so much and it was great. And I just felt like awesome because I had a Palm Pilot. So that was great. The funny thing is, I use my phone all the time, but for like organizing and calendar things, I vastly prefer paper. I like to see everything and be able to write notes and everything. So I've come full circle back around to the beginning of paper. And Sari, our other co-host occasional of this podcast, she loves paper planners. So don't get her started on that. But, I think that was just like it's such a great reference. And I don't know how long Palm Pilots actually existed, but they feel like they existed for a very short period of time. It's like for a very specific group of people.
I know. I was definitely a Palm. It was already not even called Palm Pilot anymore when I had mine. And I tried to reboot mine the other day by plugging it in, and I don't know, the battery is
it's because it's been marbleized by the judge. And you cannot reboot it anymore.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I love the idea that like, newfangled technology is now considered like an ancient thing. And I love that the Disco Janet turned into one of those little mirror ball marbles.
Oh yeah, that was great. A disco ball, if you will.
A disco ball, indeed. Yes, took me back.
The other thing that we didn't talk about, but that I thought was really funny was that Sean is like, I'm going to write an evil speech and it's going to be really, really long. And I just thought about what people say about Rabbi's sermons. You could be saying such brilliant things, and at some point people are like, Rabbi, your sermon is too long. We all have a little Sean in us.
Oh, indeed. And I love how when his audience, Michael, was not giving him back what he needed, it totally threw him.
I mean, that's such a good parenting technique too, as long as we're talking about it, which is like when you kind of go right at your child and you're having this argument, especially if maybe your children are perfect, non-stubborn atheists, but mine are extremely stubborn and you can't win. Like, you can't win an argument, but when you stop kind of giving them that piece, then they're like, what can I do to get your attention? Maybe I should clean my room. Maybe I should help with dinner. It's a little bit of that too, which is good parenting technique by Michael. I don't know, maybe he has like a million demon children and that's how anything.
Well, this is great to talk to you as always, and we will be back in some fashion to wrap up the season.
I know, and
series.
I just want to thank you for thinking up this idea and like being on top of all of us and making us do it. It's not that easy to wrangle this many rabbis and other people, and I just am super impressed. I love listening to my colleagues. It gives me like a whole different view on them and their thoughts and their work. So I thank you for that.
Well, no, thank you.
Leave this part in. Do not edit it out.
Yeah. We really talked about this project and how we would do it. And I think all launched in without any clear sense of how we do anything other than begin it. And it's been phenomenal how it has spiraled. And I think one of the things we'll do in one of our final things, I'm sure will be each of us to give to give a concluding-ish reflection about what we've gotten from that. So thank you, Rebecca. And we'll talk again soon.
We'll talk again soon.
And that's all for another installment of Tove. It was Muppet Babies I was trying to remember. But more importantly, thank you for listening. And you can help us find other people intrigued by the good place in Judaism by subscribing, giving us a good rating, or mentioning us to people you know or on social media. We're there at Tov Good Place, and you can comment or correspond with any of our co-hosts that way or by emailing to tov@tovgoodplace.com. We've got show notes for the episode on our website, tovgoodplace.com, along with other helpful links and a lexicon of our Jewish lingo. Rebecca Rosenthal is on Instagram at Rabbi Rebecca Bakes, and I'm John Spirosavet at RabbiJS3 on Instagram and Twitter, and also at rabbijohn.net. We welcome you to our communities as well, where we've got on-site and virtual goings-on all the time at Central Synagogue in Manhattan and Temple Beth Abraham in New Hampshire. Thanks so much for listening. And to repurpose the sign-off you might remember from the official Good Place podcast, now go learn more about something good.
Bum, 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 bum.